I've worked in libraries since 1962. So I was only 3. I worked in Hertfordshire and then the London Borough of Lambeth, then the London Borough of Enfield. But since 1997, I've been working to coordinate something called the Network, which is a network of libraries, archives, museums and galleries that work around social justice. And through that, I've been involved in work with libraries around Sanctuary since some of the very early attempts back in the 70s and 80s, and then the kind of big leaps forward at the beginning of the 2000s. And there was a project called Welcome to Your Library, which actually looked at 6 areas in England, including a consortium of libraries in the northeast. And I'm going to come back to this theme, all these things happen, and then all these things disappear. And I think one of the things that we need to hold on to is why that is. So I'm not going to talk very long. I've got kind of 3 or 4 main points I wanted to make. So I'll attempt to rattle through those and see how I go. Firstly, it's great to be here. I keep telling people that Amina and I met online, and then that sounds very but ever since we did meet online, I've been reading about, hearing, talking about the work we're doing here, but to actually come and see the living library now is brilliant. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing and hearing how it takes off. And that you have masses of people coming in and using it and using this stuff. It's absolutely brilliant. So what I think this building gives, and what I think the kind of work we're talking about gives, is a sense of welcome. I've just been working on, I live in Devon, just outside Exeter, and I've been working on a project that's the first of its kind in the UK, where libraries of different kinds, so public, health, university, school, college, are all working together to look at how they can improve their welcome more widely than just refugees. They're looking at new arrivals altogether. So particularly, for example, looking at the welcome that they might give overseas workers coming to work in the health service in Cornwall and Devon. Originally, we decided, they had thought, is a better way of putting it, that we would go for a library sanctuary status. But we realised that each of the organisations involved was all at a very different stage. So we decided that rather than that, what we would focus on for the 9 months of the project was how we could enhance that welcome. And the welcome bit has been the bit that's been really exciting. So we've seen libraries that don't normally do this kind of work, so some of the university libraries suddenly providing warm welcomes for their students, particularly their overseas students, and beginning to look at the kind of collections of books a bit like these that they could have in a small-scale way in their university libraries to just kind of make people more aware of other languages and more aware of who's coming and more welcome. So I think the welcome is a really core and key part of what we're talking about. My relationship with Libraries of Sanctuary is slightly odd in that I don't work for them. I am, as Amina said, I helped draw up some of the criteria when they were looking at what they would judge the award by, and on panellists for when you got yours. So that was a wonderful surprise to hear that you had. So again, congratulations. So I think Libraries of Sanctuary brings together 2 big things. The idea of welcome, and the idea of looking at the needs of real people and what those real needs are. Rather than starting with some kind of rather woolly concept, they start by talking to people and finding out what their needs are, and then looking at how a library of whatever kind can start to fulfil those needs. And I think this is the first of my 3 big things, really. I think now more than ever, this kind of work is absolutely vital. When we're looking at a country which, I was born here, I grew up here, I think or thought I knew the country well, but there are elements of the country now which I really almost don't recognise. And some of the issues around what the media and the social media are doing around new arrivals, particularly refugees, horrifies me. And the way that those voices are being amplified by people, he said delicately, at a very top level, who should know better. If I say even the BBC, you'll know what I mean. I don't actually mean even, because the BBC has its flaws like any other organisation. But even the BBC will keep reiterating about illegal immigrants in a way that really annoys me every time I see the news, because it's perpetuating this idea that people are arriving here illegally and that people don't have a right to come here. So that strikes me as one of the key major things that it's important that we begin to look at and to tackle. I think that we've got some. You'll all have heard of the hostile environment and the impact that has had, and the increasing impact. So, yes, it was introduced as a strategy back, actually probably as early as 2005, 2006, but picked up in a big way around 2010, 2012, 11, 2012, with the horrendous impacts that that's had on all sorts of communities and their lives. And we've seen that echoed, amplified, whatever, by the so-called Windrush generation and the things that happened to people who came here, were welcomed here and came here legitimately, and then suddenly found they somehow had lost their right to be in the UK. And there are major issues in there that I think the big we, need to be thinking about and tackling. So I think those two, the media and social media view, the way that we have been pulled into a political drama that's probably not of our making, certainly not of my making, where we're trying to deport people to a country that's been declared unsafe, just seems to me entirely wrong, and something that we need to be providing evidence of support for, to show other voices and to show what other things are happening. And my final point in this sort of little sub bit is this library exemplifies it. We're part of a wider world, so I'm not going to upset people around Brexit, but it seemed to me a bizarre decision for the country to have made. And what we've reaped ever since have been issues around behaving as though somehow we've brought all the blinds down and we've kind of locked ourselves in, whereas we actually know that we need to be reaching out and meeting people from other places. And this library just does that, sends that message beautifully. It's not about being in a kind of sealed room. It's about how we reach out, how we meet other people, what we can do, what we can share. So that's a long rambling point. That was my first point. My second point is a really quick one. People, and I suppose I mean people in libraries, talk rather as though the kind of work we're doing here and the kind of work that Libraries of Sanctuary celebrates is new. And it's that, I don't know, partly people not knowing their history and not knowing that anything came before them, and partly a sort of almost carelessness about what we've done. So I'm not going to do the history now, you'd be here for the rest of the week probably. But we know that libraries in the UK have provided a welcome for people since at least the 1940s, when the Polish Circulating Library set up and welcomed people who had either fought for the UK during the war or become refugees from Poland post-war, and provided library books and materials for them. So we know that from the 40s onwards, there's a long history of providing that kind of support and that kind of wide range of services to meet people's needs. as I touched on right at the beginning, one of the things that does worry me is that we go through so many cycles. If any of you have either do or have ever worked for a local authority or a council, you'll know what I mean. So like everything's in this really strange little world where we're doing something for maybe next year at the latest. The sort of work we're talking about here and the sort of work we're talking about welcoming new arrivals, in my opinion, needs to be something we're thinking about for the next 10 years, next 25 years. I can remember back in the 1990s, some research was done to look at how as a society we could deal with the fallout from the closure of the mines and most of the work in parts of Wales. And people at the time were saying, this can't be done in 2 years. It's going to take a generation to shift things. And we've kind of, I don't know, from my own experience, we worked in local authorities up until 1996, and still work with local authorities, although not in one. Everything seems set to a very small-scale timetable, and it doesn't give that scope to do the kind of work that we're talking about here today. It's also tied to funding, and I won't even go there today, but funding is a... If you're working in a public library service particularly, funding's a nightmare. You probably know that a number of major library services and councils are currently declaring themselves more or less bankrupt. The Section 114 thing that you've read about in the papers, I'm sure. So I do quite a lot of work with Birmingham, and Birmingham Library Service is kind of, on hold, probably, well, they're talking about closing 25 of their libraries. And it's this whole very short-sighted, very narrow view of what a library does, of what the public needs, of what the council can provide, that worries me. So my second point really is we need to get beyond this very narrow, short-term thinking. And my last point is a really, really quick one. I think there's also a danger with what the sort of work we're doing, that we're all being boxed into something. I don't know whether you know what I mean. Everybody seems to want a simplistic view of us all. And it might be based on gender or sexuality or race or age or class or whatever it is, but it's always one-dimensional. And I think we need to get beyond that as well, to think more about, if we're providing books in other languages for the community, yes, we're going to appeal to people who either speak, read, or are learning those languages, but we also need to think beyond that to, who are they? What attributes do they have? What things do they already bring? So, I'll finish on a personal note, really. I get a bit fed up. I've worked in libraries a very long time, and I keep being labelled by something. So now I'm probably the guy who does new arrivals, if anybody, or John and his refugees, that kind of. But it's been like that. So I used to be a children's librarian. So it was always, oh, here come John's children, in that sort of ominous voice that people that don't really like children have. Then I came out, and so for quite a long time, I was, the gay librarian, and there weren't very many people at my level. When I was in Lambeth, I was head of service, so I was a chief officer. I was the only out gay man in the council at that stage. So I kind of had another label, and it's kind of gone on, and I just get a bit fed up with that. I think, I don't want to be seen as one of those things. I want to be seen as all those things. And I think what this space gives is a chance for us to actually celebrate that, to celebrate the humanness of us all, and bring people together, and join with them in understanding more about what the world is, what we all do, how our lives run, and what we can share. Thank you very much.